Do you still have sex during menopause? Those 8 words destroyed what I thought was a promising relationship, but they also led to the most empowering moment of my 52-year-old life. I'm still shaking as I write this. What started as an innocent dinner date turned into the most humiliating and ultimately liberating experience I've had since my divorce 3 years ago. This man, who seemed so perfect, so mature, so different from the usual dating app disasters, showed his true colors with one invasive question that made my blood boil. But here's the thing. Instead of shrinking away like the polite lady I was raised to be, I decided to give him an education he'll never forget. What happened next not only restored my faith in myself, but also opened doors I never expected at this stage of my life. Some of you might think I went too far. Others will probably cheer. But I need to share this story because every woman over 50 deserves to know that we don't have to tolerate disrespect just because society tells us we should be grateful for any male attention at our age. Buckle up, because this story has more twists than a soap opera, and the ending, even I didn't see it coming. Let me paint you the picture of where I was in my life when this all started. 3 years ago, my 25-year marriage ended when my husband decided his secretary was more exciting than the woman who'd raised his children and supported his career. The divorce was messy, expensive, and left me questioning everything about my worth as a woman. At 52, I felt invisible, too old for the young crowd, too tired for the games, and honestly, too scared to put myself out there again. But my daughter, Emma, kept pushing me. Mom, you're gorgeous, successful, and you have so much love to give. Don't let Dad's midlife crisis define your future. Easy for her to say at 26, with her whole life ahead of her. Still, she helped me set up dating profiles, took new photos, and basically dragged me kicking and screaming back into the modern dating world. I'm a senior marketing director at a Fortune 500 company. I own my home outright. I travel when I want. I have amazing friendships. And yes, I'm going through menopause. But I'm handling it like the strong woman I've always been. My body is different than it was at 30. But I've earned every laugh line and gray hair. I thought I was finally at peace with who I am. Then I met David through a mutual friend at a wine tasting event. He was 49, divorced for 2 years, with teenage kids he clearly adored. He had this salt and pepper beard, kind eyes, and when he talked about his work as an architect, his passion was infectious. Most importantly, he seemed to see me, really see me, not just as a consolation prize or someone to pass time with. Our first date was magical. We talked for hours about books, travel dreams, and shared stories about navigating life after divorce. He walked me to my car, kissed my hand like a gentleman, and texted me the next morning saying he couldn't wait to see me again. For the first time in years, I felt like a desirable woman, not just someone's ex-wife or somebody's mom. The second date was even better. He brought me flowers. Not generic roses, but a beautiful mixed bouquet, because he'd remembered I mentioned loving wildflowers. We went to this cozy Italian restaurant where he'd made reservations, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He asked thoughtful questions about my career, my hobbies, my dreams for the future. When he held my hand across the table, I actually felt butterflies. I started letting myself imagine possibilities. Maybe this was my second chance at love. Maybe all those lonely nights, wondering if I'd ever feel desired again, were behind me. I even bought new lingerie, something I hadn't done since my divorce. I was ready to open my heart again, to be vulnerable, to trust. We'd been texting constantly between dates, good morning messages, funny memes, shared photos of our days. He seemed genuinely interested in my life, asking about my work projects and remembering details about my friends and family. When he suggested a third date at his place where he'd cook for me, I said yes without hesitation. I spent extra time getting ready that evening. I wore a dress that made me feel confident, did my makeup carefully, and even splurged on a professional blowout. As I drove to his house, I was nervous but excited. It felt like the beginning of something real. Looking back now, I realized I was so hungry for connection, so desperate to feel wanted again, that I overlooked some subtle red flags. the way he sometimes seemed more interested in my age than my achievements, how he'd make comments about women my age that felt slightly off, the fact that most of his questions eventually circled back to topics related to aging and what that meant for relationships. But I was falling for the fantasy he was selling me, the dream of being cherished by a man who appreciated maturity and experience. I thought I'd finally found someone who valued wisdom over youth, depth over superficiality. I had no idea I was walking straight into a trap that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my own worth. But everything began to change when I started paying closer attention to the details of our conversations. It began with seemingly innocent comments that made me feel slightly uncomfortable, but I brushed them off because I liked him so much. During our second date, when I mentioned that my daughter was getting married next year, he said, "It must be nice to be at that stage of life where you can focus on being a grandmother soon instead of worrying about your own biological clock." The comment stung because I'm nowhere near ready to be defined solely by my potential role as a grandmother, but I laughed it off. Then there were the questions that felt oddly specific. He asked about my skincare routine, what supplements I took, how I stayed in shape at my age. When I mentioned I was taking yoga classes, he said, "That's smart. You need to keep flexible as long as possible." The way he said "as long as possible" made me feel like I had an expiration date. I started noticing that he seemed almost too knowledgeable about menopause for a man who'd never been married to someone who'd gone through it. His ex-wife was only 45 when they divorced, and according to him, they'd separated because she was going through some kind of identity crisis. He knew terminology, symptoms, and statistics that seemed unusual unless someone had done research. During our phone calls, he'd steer conversations toward topics about aging, health changes, and what it meant to date later in life. He asked about my energy levels, my sleep patterns, whether I was seeing any doctors regularly. At first, I thought he was being caring and considerate, a mature man who understood that dating in your 50s meant being realistic about health and life changes. But then came the night he invited me to his place for dinner. His house was beautiful, a modern design that showcased his architectural skills. He'd prepared a lovely meal, opened a good bottle of wine, and the atmosphere was perfect. We settled on his couch after dinner, and the conversation turned more intimate. He started talking about his marriage, how the physical side of things had changed as they got older, how important physical compatibility was in relationships. I thought we were having an honest adult conversation about intimacy and expectations. I even shared some of my own concerns about dating again after being with one person for so many years, how divorce had affected my confidence, and how I was learning to feel comfortable in my changing body. He listened intently, almost too intently, asking follow-up questions that felt increasingly invasive. How do you feel about your body now compared to when you were younger? Do you think your needs have changed? What are your biggest concerns about physical intimacy? The questions made me squirm, but I convinced myself that he was just trying to ensure we were compatible, that he was being mature and direct about important issues that many people avoid discussing. Then he started sharing what seemed like research he'd done. He talked about studies he'd read about women's sexuality after 50, mentioned articles about hormone replacement therapy, and shared statistics about relationship satisfaction in older couples. It was impressive, but also strange. Why was he so well versed in these topics? When I asked him where he'd learned all this information, he said he'd done some reading after his divorce because he knew he'd likely be dating older women and wanted to be prepared and understanding. At the time, it seemed thoughtful, even sweet. But as the evening progressed, his questions became more personal and direct. He wanted to know about my medical history, my hormone levels, whether I'd experienced specific symptoms. When I started feeling uncomfortable and tried to change the subject, he'd circle back with comments like, "I just want to make sure we can be completely honest with each other about everything." The turning point came when he started talking about his research into what he called the reality of intimacy after menopause. He used clinical terms, cited studies, and spoke about women's bodies like he was discussing a medical condition rather than talking to an actual woman sitting next to him. I began to realize that this wasn't a caring man trying to understand women better. This was someone who had approached dating women my age like a research project, with preconceived notions about what our bodies could and couldn't do, what we wanted or didn't want, and what we were or weren't capable of. The romantic fantasy I'd been living in started cracking around the edges, but I wasn't prepared for how completely it was about to shatter. The conversation took a darker turn when he opened another bottle of wine and suggested we get more comfortable. As we settled closer together on the couch, his hands started wandering, and I thought we were moving toward a natural, intimate moment between two adults who were genuinely connecting. But then he started talking again, and what came out of his mouth made my skin crawl. "I've been reading about how women your age often feel insecure about their bodies," he whispered, his hands still moving. "But I want you to know that I find mature women incredibly attractive. There's something about experienced women who know what they want." The way he said, "women your age" and "mature women" felt clinical, detached. He wasn't talking to me, Sarah, the individual woman sitting next to him. He was talking to his fantasy of what a woman in her 50s should be, grateful, insecure, and desperately needing his validation. I tried to redirect the conversation back to us as individuals, asking him what he liked about me specifically, what had drawn him to me as a person. But every answer circled back to generalizations about women at this stage of life and how much he appreciated the confidence that comes with age and experience. As the evening progressed, his questions became increasingly invasive and specific. He wanted to know about changes in my body, whether I'd experienced particular symptoms, how I felt about various aspects of intimacy. When I finally asked him directly why these details mattered so much, his answer chilled me. "I just believe in being realistic about expectations," he said, refilling his wine glass. "I mean, at our age, we have to be practical about physical limitations and changes. I've done my research, so I know what to expect, but I want to make sure you're comfortable discussing these things openly." The word research kept coming up. This wasn't a man getting to know the woman he was interested in. This was someone who had studied women my age like specimens and thought he knew exactly what I needed to hear, what I was insecure about, and how to manipulate those insecurities to his advantage. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, needing a moment to process what was happening. While washing my hands, I caught sight of myself in his mirror and saw a strong, intelligent, successful woman who deserved so much better than whatever game this man was playing. When I returned to the living room, he dimmed the lights and was sitting with his phone in his hands, scrolling through something. As I approached, I caught a glimpse of his screen. He was reading an article titled, "What Every Man Should Know About Dating Women Over 50. My blood ran cold. Doing a little light reading, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, slightly embarrassed but not ashamed. "Just wanted to refresh my memory on a few things," he said, with what I'm sure he thought was a charming smile. "I want to make sure I'm being sensitive to your situation." My situation. As if being a woman over 50 was a medical condition requiring special handling. That's when he set down his phone, looked me directly in the eyes, and asked the question that changed everything. "So do you still have sex during menopause?" The room went completely silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Not "how do you feel about intimacy?" or "what are your thoughts on physical relationships?" but a direct clinical question about my biological functions, as if I were a specimen he was studying, rather than a human being he was supposedly attracted to. I sat there for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. This man had spent weeks building my trust, making me feel special and desired, all while researching me like a case study. Every compliment, every thoughtful gesture, every moment of seeming connection had been part of a calculated approach based on what he thought women my age needed to hear. But as I looked at his expectant face, waiting for me to answer his invasive question like an obedient subject, something inside me snapped. He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. I stared at him for what felt like an eternity, watching his confident expression slowly shift to confusion as the silence stretched between us. Then I smiled, not the polite, accommodating smile I'd been giving him all evening, but the kind of smile I use in boardroom negotiations when someone underestimates me. Do I still have sex during menopause? I repeated slowly, savoring each word. Well, David, that's certainly an interesting way to phrase the question. I stood up, smoothing down my dress, and walked to where he'd left his phone. The article was still open on his screen, and I picked it up, reading aloud. Chapter 3. Managing Expectations About Physical Intimacy. Fascinating research material you have here. His face flushed red. Sarah, I can explain. Oh, please do, I interrupted, settling back onto the couch but keeping distance between us. I'm absolutely dying to hear your explanation. But first, let me ask you a few questions of my own. I opened his browser history before he could object. What I found there made my stomach turn, and my anger crystallize into something powerful and focused. Signs of low self-esteem in divorced women over 50. I read from his search history. How to make older women feel desired. What menopausal women want to hear in bed. Managing the insecurities of women who feel past their prime. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. And my personal favorite, I continued, scrolling further. Why desperate older women are easy to please. I looked up at him with ice-cold eyes. Desperate older women, David? Is that what you think I am? It's not. I wasn't. I just wanted to be prepared. Prepared for what? I stood up, my voice cutting through his stammering. Prepared to manipulate a vulnerable woman. Prepared to prey on someone you assumed would be grateful for any male attention. I started pacing, my anger building with each step. Let me tell you what I think happened here, David. You decided that divorced women in their 50s would be easy targets. Lonely, insecure, desperate for validation. So you did your research like a hunter studying prey, learning exactly what buttons to push and what lies to tell. Sarah, please, you're misunderstanding. Am I? I spun around to face him. Then explain to me why you have a folder on your phone labeled Dating Strategies, with screenshots of profiles of women between 48 and 55. Explain why you have notes about each woman's vulnerabilities and insecurities. Explain this. I held up his phone, showing him a document I'd found with my name at the top and a list underneath. Recently divorced, low self-confidence about aging, mentions feeling invisible, likely grateful for attention, probably insecure about physical changes. The color drained from his face completely. You want to know if I still have sex during menopause? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Here's your answer. I have amazing sex with men who see me as a woman, not a research project. I have incredible intimacy with people who value my mind, my spirit, and yes, my experienced body. But you'll never find out, because you're exactly the kind of predatory loser I wouldn't let touch me with a 10-foot pole. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, but I wasn't finished. And just so we're clear, I said, turning back one final time, I'm going to make sure every woman in our social circle knows exactly what kind of man you are. I'm going to tell my friend Jessica, who introduced us. I'm going to post in every local women's group I'm in. And I'm going to make damn sure that no other woman has to sit through your pathetic research-based seduction routine. His face went white. You can't. My reputation, my business. Your reputation? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. You should have thought about that before you decided to treat dating like a hunting expedition. You messed with the wrong woman, David. I didn't claw my way to the top of my career by being polite to men who disrespect me. I opened his phone one more time and deleted every photo he'd taken of me, every text conversation we'd had, and then I blocked my own number. Oh, and David, I said, hand on the door handle, next time you want to research women over 50, here's a free tip. We're not desperate, we're not grateful for scraps, and we're definitely not easy targets. We're experienced enough to spot manipulative boys like you from a mile away. I slammed the door behind me and walked to my car with my head held high, leaving him sitting there with his research and his shattered assumptions. But the real surprise was yet to come. As I drove away from David's house, my hands were shaking, not from fear or embarrassment, but from pure adrenaline. I felt more alive and powerful than I had in years, but I knew this wasn't over. Men like David don't just slink away quietly when their manipulative tactics are exposed. Sure enough, the next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages. At first, they were apologetic. "Sarah, please, let me explain. You misunderstood everything. I really care about you." When I didn't respond, they turned angry. "You're overreacting. I was just trying to be considerate. This is why men don't want to date women your age. You're all crazy and paranoid." That last message was the final nail in his coffin. I screenshot everything and sent it to my friend Jessica, who had introduced us, along with a detailed explanation of what had happened. Her response was immediate and furious. "Oh, hell no, Sarah, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." "But you need to know, you're not his first victim." What Jessica told me next made my blood boil and my heart break for other women simultaneously. David had apparently worked his way through several women in our extended social circle over the past 2 years. Jessica had heard whispers but hadn't connected the dots until now. There was Linda, 54, who'd met him through a hiking group and had a similar experience. Maria, 49, who'd dated him briefly and said he made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. Even younger Sarah, yes, another Sarah, who was 47 and had complained to mutual friends about his invasive questions and weird research comments. "He has a type," Jessica said during our emergency coffee meeting. "Successful, divorced women who are new to dating again. He specifically targets women who mention feeling invisible or uncertain about getting back out there." I realized I was dealing with a serial emotional predator who had turned exploiting women's vulnerabilities into an art form. But instead of feeling like a victim, I felt like a warrior who'd been handed a mission. That's when I decided to do something that would change not just my life, but potentially the lives of every woman in our community. I spent the weekend crafting a detailed post for our local women's Facebook group, a private group of over 800 professional women in our city. I didn't just warn them about David. I created a comprehensive guide about predatory dating behaviors, complete with screenshots of his research materials, with phone numbers blocked, examples of his manipulative tactics, and red flags that other women should watch for. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, I had dozens of private messages from women sharing their own stories. Not just about David, but about other men who used similar tactics. Women who had been made to feel grateful for crumbs of attention, who had been researched and manipulated, who had been targeted specifically because of their age and relationship status. But here's where the story takes a turn I never expected. Among the messages was one from Emma Rodriguez, a 28-year-old journalist who had been investigating exactly this type of predatory behavior for a story she was writing about dating exploitation in the digital age. She asked if she could interview me and if I'd be willing to share my experience publicly to help other women. "Your story isn't just about one bad date," she explained during our phone call. "It's about a systemic problem where women over 40 are being specifically targeted by men who see us as easy marks. You didn't just escape a predator. You documented his entire playbook." Within 2 weeks, Emma's article was published in a major online publication. The title was "The Menopause Question: How Predators Target Women Over 50." My story was the centerpiece. But Emma had uncovered a whole network of men using similar tactics across multiple cities. The article went viral. I started receiving messages from women all over the country, sharing their experiences and thanking me for speaking up. But I also started getting interview requests, speaking opportunities, and invitations to address women's groups about recognizing and responding to dating predators. 3 months later, I launched a consulting business helping women over 40 navigate dating safely and confidently. I speak at conferences, run workshops, and provide one-on-one coaching for women who are ready to date again, but want to do it from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. As for David, his business took a significant hit when the article came out and women started sharing their experiences publicly. He ended up moving to another city, but not before several women filed complaints with professional licensing boards. The best part? I'm now dating again, but on my own terms. with full confidence in my worth and zero tolerance for manipulation. One invasive question changed my entire life trajectory, just not in the way David expected. 6 months after that night, I'm sitting in my home office, looking at my calendar filled with speaking engagements and coaching sessions, and I can barely recognize the woman I was, before David asked that question. Here's the truth I wish I could tell every woman over 50. That moment of humiliation was actually the greatest gift he could have given me. Not because what he did was right, it was absolutely predatory and wrong, but because his cruelty forced me to confront how I'd been viewing myself and what I'd been accepting as normal treatment. I'd been operating from a place of scarcity, believing that my options were limited because of my age, that I should be grateful for any attention, that I needed to make myself smaller and more accommodating to be worthy of love. David's research-based manipulation showed me exactly where that mindset leads, straight into the arms of people who see vulnerability as opportunity. The ripple effects of speaking out have been incredible. Last month I received a message from a woman named Patricia in Portland, who said my story helped her recognize that her boyfriend's constant comments about her changing body weren't concern, but control. She ended that relationship and is now happily dating someone who appreciates all of her. Another woman, Jennifer in Miami, told me that reading about David's research folder made her check her own boyfriend's phone, where she found similar materials. She confronted him, and while it was painful, she saved herself months or years of emotional manipulation. But perhaps the most meaningful message came from my own daughter, Emma. She wrote, "Mom, watching you transform from someone who apologized for taking up space to someone who commands rooms and changes lives has shown me what real strength looks like. You didn't just save yourself, you became a lighthouse for other women. The coaching business has grown beyond anything I imagined. I work with women who are ready to date confidently, teaching them to recognize red flags, set boundaries, and approach relationships from a position of strength rather than desperation. We talk about the difference between someone getting to know you as an individual versus someone researching you as a demographic. I've learned that predators like David count on women's socialization to be polite, to give the benefit of the doubt, to avoid making scenes. They exploit our conditioning to be grateful and accommodating. But there's incredible power in refusing to play those games, in trusting your instincts even when someone is telling you you're overreacting. The dating landscape has completely changed for me. I now approach it like the successful businesswoman I am, with clear standards, firm boundaries, and zero tolerance for anyone who doesn't recognize my worth. I've had several wonderful relationships since David, with men who see my age and experience as assets, not liabilities to work around. Just last week, I went on a date with Michael, a 54-year-old teacher who asked me about my business, my passions, my goals for the future. When physical intimacy came up naturally in conversation, he asked about my preferences, my comfort level, what made me feel valued and desired. Not once did he mention my age as a factor or limitation. The difference was night and day. I want every woman reading this to understand. Your age is not an apology you need to make. Your body changes are not flaws you need to compensate for. Your divorce or relationship history is not baggage that makes you less valuable. You are not desperate. You are not grateful for scraps. And you are definitely not easy targets. If someone is researching you like a case study, instead of getting to know you as an individual, run. If someone talks about women your age as if you're part of a problematic demographic, instead of a unique human being, run. If someone asks invasive questions about your body or medical situation on early dates, especially questions that feel clinical rather than caring, run. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. If someone makes you feel like you should be grateful for their attention rather than feeling genuinely appreciated for who you are, they're not your person. To the women who are hesitating to speak up about their own experiences with dating predators, your voice matters. Your story could save another woman from what you went through. Don't let shame or embarrassment keep you silent. These men count on our silence to continue their behavior. And to the men who might be reading this, if you're genuinely interested in dating women over 50, approach us as individuals, not demographics. Get to know our minds, our personalities, our unique stories. Don't research us like specimens. Connect with us like human beings. I'm curious, have any of you had similar experiences with people who seemed to be following a playbook rather than genuinely getting to know you? How did you handle it? What red flags do you wish you'd recognize sooner? Your stories matter. Share them below, and let's continue building a community where women support each other in demanding the respect we deserve. Remember, you are enough exactly as you are, right now. Anyone who makes you feel otherwise is showing you exactly who they are. Believe them.